Thank you, everyone. I'm Alden Meyer, Senior Associate for E3G, based in the Washington office. E3G is an international climate think tank, headquarters in London with offices in Brussels and Berlin as well. I will introduce my three colleagues in my remarks. We are here to give you our opening impressions and expectations for the subsidiary body negotiations here in Bonn. So it's no surprise that these negotiations are taking place in very challenging circumstances, including severe geopolitical fractures, a war in the Persian Gulf that is impacting energy and food supplies and prices, extreme weather events fueled by climate change, which will be exacerbated by a strong El Nino cycle starting later this year, and of course, tensions over trade flows and tariffs. Despite this, we saw a smooth opening to the Bonn session yesterday, which surprised some people here, and there were no agenda fights. I think this reflects the fact that much of COP30 in Belém was a negotiation over adding new items to the agenda, with resolution on climate finance, mitigation ambition, and trade issues only reached in the final Muchirao decision. With dialogues and consultations on these issues starting here in Bonn, there wasn't much of an appetite to start fights on additional matters. That doesn't mean there's not going to be tensions here. There clearly will be, but there was not an agenda fight. So in our view, the discussions in Bonn need to address three big gaps. First, the gap between the massive cuts in emissions needed to meet the Paris temperature goals and the much lower level of collective ambition that's reflected in country NDCs and real-world actions. Second, the need to substantially scale up resilience, capacity, and adaptation activities to cope with the mounting impacts of climate change, especially in developing countries, as well as to respond more effectively to loss and damage. And finally, the need to significantly increase the flow of both public and private finance so as to be able to close these other two gaps. So let me just introduce what we're going to talk about today. My E3G colleague, Cosima Casso, will address the first gap. Amongst other things, she'll address what progress can the Turkish-Australian hybrid presidency make in supporting implementation and action. How can the Global Implementation Accelerator and the Belém Mission 1.5 initiative that were part of the Muchirao decision, as well as Turkey's new finance delivery mechanism, complement the action agenda and existing structures in advancing implementation? And finally, what can we expect from SB64 on progress on energy transition and mitigation? After Cosima, Ana Mulio Alvarez will discuss the technically complex and politically charged negotiations on adaptation, including what is needed out of Bonn to advance agreement and implementation of the global goal on adaptation, the Nairobi Work Program, the Baku Adaptation Roadmap, and the Belém Addis Vision. So if you want to know the difference between the bar and the BAV, you're in the right place. How to begin showcasing a solid trajectory to meeting the goal agreed in Belém of tripling adaptation finance for developing countries by 2035, and finally, the need for a dedicated space to discuss loss and damage. And then finally, Lily Hartzell will address the climate finance negotiations, including the discussions that started yesterday on the new work program on Article 9, where the G77 in China called for the discussions to focus on Article 9.1 and how developed countries will provide finance for developing countries. Well, developed countries said the discussions should cover the whole of Article 9. She'll also outline what to expect from the two sessions that are taking place this afternoon and tomorrow morning of the Veritas Dialogue on the implementation of Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement in complementarity with Article 9, and she will preview the prospects for progress in Brazil's consultations with parties on its Baku to Belém roadmap to scale up finance for developing countries to 1.3 trillion by 2035, which was the goal set at COP29 in Baku. Finally, let me note that the first of three dialogues on trade and climate change that were mandated at COP30 will take place this Saturday. We expect to see discussion both of the impacts on developing countries of the EU CBAM and other unilateral measures, as well as ways that enhanced cooperation on trade policy can drive climate ambition, and the role that trade discussions here in the UNFCCC is distinct from other international fora like the WTO can play in achieving the objectives of the Framework Convention and the Paris Agreement. I would say it promises to be a very lively meeting, so bring your popcorn. If you want to learn more on this topic, several NGOs are sponsoring a side event here in Bonn tomorrow at 4:30 to discuss climate and trade cooperation for climate resilient development. I'll be one of the panelists on that side event, and my colleague Jordan Dilworth, who is also with us in the room, would be happy to discuss the dynamics around trade issues with you. So let me turn it over now to Cosima.
Thanks so much, Alden. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how implementation and action is showing up in SBs and what we need to see from the Turkish-Australian presidency first. And just to provide some context, so we're in a time where we're undergoing two structural shifts that are affecting the climate regime. Firstly, as Alden has laid out, the geopolitical situation is very fragmented. It's constantly changing. We have, this movement to a multipolar world, a movement to kind of more transactional approach to engagement, and this is affecting the multilateral system. It's affecting COPs. It's affecting how easy it is to reach consensus, and it's affecting kind of how traditional alliances are showing up as well at COPs. So previous approaches and norms don't apply in the same way as they used to. The second shift is that we're 10 years since the Paris Agreement was signed, and the rulebook is now complete. And the first global stocktake has laid out a series of structural objectives that we need to Paris temperature goals. And the priority is now on delivering and reaching those goals at the speed and scale needed to keep the Paris goals in sight. So the system needs to evolve. As Simon Steele laid out yesterday, we need to kind of move towards a system that's supporting action. And the presidency this year, Turkey and Australia, they have a crucial role to play in steering the ship and setting up for this new era of implementation. And we hope to see kind of clear signs at the SBs this week on that. The action agenda should be at the center of any new regime. It is the bridge between the formal negotiations and the real-world delivery, and it can showcase the progress that's been made in practice. Brazil made a really important contribution last year at COP30 with restructuring the action agenda, setting out the 5-year plan, and kind of aligning this kind of whole ecosystem of different initiatives with the outcomes of the global stocktake. And this created a greater coherence, also stronger accountability, and a clearer sense of the collective direction that's needed. However, there's further action needed. The work's not done yet to really kind of politically elevate the action agenda as kind of equal stance to the negotiations, and also kind of ensure that real world and real economy progress is better reflected in those negotiations. To kind of, there's a lot going on in the world, and this needs to be kind of showing up and breaking through some of the negotiation dynamics that we see. So COP30 also mandated two new initiatives from the Montreal package. So the first one is the Global Implementation Accelerator, which is mandated to support acceleration of action in high-impact areas, and then the Belém Mission to 1.5 to unblock barriers and identify solutions for progress. In addition, Turkey has outlined its priorities for the action agenda, and one of those includes this new finance delivery mechanism. So these three new initiatives are on the table and need to be shaped, and they are kind of adding to this kind of fast-growing but quite crowded implementation landscape. To really get the most out of these, we'll hear a bit more, I think, over the course of the week. On Friday, we have a session on both the GIA and the Belém Mission to 1.5. And today, Turkey will lay out its presidency priorities for the action agenda. And it's kind of critical to use this moment to engage, to get feedback, and to really also kind of understand what else is out there, what is happening within the UNFCCC architecture, what is happening in terms of other real-world economy processes, and how these new initiatives can fit in and actually support what's already in place. The presidencies need to work together to reduce the fragmentation across the system, and also kind of drive coherence across the implementation landscape, and really kind of design these new initiatives with the delivery gaps in mind, and maintaining political attention on implementation over time. It's also really important that they build kind of coherent and continuity between the presidencies. So, for example, next year we have Ethiopia in the presidency seat. So really kind of early discussions with Ethiopia on their priorities, how they are going to support the action agenda, how they see the evolution of the implementation side of COPs is really important to make sure that we kind of have a clear and continuous path forward with on the road to COP33 and the second global stocktake. Just want to say a little bit on mitigation and the energy transition now. Linking to the action agenda, I think it's very positive that the clean energy transition is one of Turkey's key priorities, and electrification is a key part of that. Putting the energy transition at the heart of the COP agenda is absolutely critical at a moment when the world is facing the largest kind of energy security crisis in history. And it shows that the climate regime can respond to the top political concerns of the day. So an immediate and global step change in electrification can really make a difference in the delivery of the global energy goals of tripling renewables, doubling energy efficiency, and transitioning away from fossil fuels that was agreed at COP28. And this is critical to protect people and business from fossil fuel volatility, changing prices, etc. On other mitigation topics, obviously this is a key moment to kind of maintain momentum after Santa Marta conference, which happened in April, where 57 countries gathered to address the challenges and find practical solutions for implementing the transition away from fossil fuels. This shows that there is a clear political appetite and momentum behind the coordination of on TAF, and it's important to kind of make sure that we're bringing that political weight, and parties are bringing that political weight to discussions here in Bonn. Also kind of maintaining momentum for the Brazilian roadmap process and their own kind of delivery and national roadmaps throughout the year. So, just to conclude, the current oil shock is really a reminder that the fossil fuel dependence creates strategic vulnerabilities, and the only way to assure energy security, price stability, and prosperity is to accelerate the energy transition and to accelerate the implementation. And without accelerating implementation and adaptation is also really critical as well. So I'll pass to my colleague Anna to talk a bit more about this.
Thank you, Cosima. I'll try to keep it short. I think we saw yesterday at the plenary and across discussions that adaptation really is emerging as one of the defining issues of SB64. We're seeing a strong focus from parties to advance all agenda items, including the GGA, the Baku Adaptation Roadmap, and the Berlin-Addis Vision. And there's a clear expectation that adaptation should be a core pillar of climate action alongside mitigation. So even though discussions are quite technical, we are seeing very practical questions being asked, like how are adaptation plans being implemented? How is this progress going to be measured? How will support reach communities that need it most? And parties will need to sort out through these questions and come to the table willing to collaborate and compromise in order to move forward and arrive to COP31 with things to agree on. At the same time, adaptation finance continues to be a major challenge, and developing countries are bringing up that progress on adaptation cannot be separated from progress on finance, and that this finance is needed for the implementation to occur. And there is, I think, growing pressure on developed countries to demonstrate a credible pathway towards delivering on the commitment on the tripling that was agreed in Belém. The big kind of adaptation finance agenda at this session is the Adaptation Fund, which is transitioning to serve the Paris Agreement, and these negotiations will probably be tricky, but will offer opportunities for the fund to receive new streams of finance. Regarding the global goal on adaptation, conversations have started quite constructively, even though there were some of the most contentious discussions that we saw at COP30, and parties are now really focused on what the structure of the new vision, the Belém to Addis vision, how will it happen? How will they test and learn from the new indicators? How will they be aligned politically? And how are countries progressing to meet these new indicators to the targets? Finally, in the Baku Adaptation Roadmap, we'll have a workshop today. Discussions over the weekend were quite contentious around the scope laid out by the SB chairs on their letter. that was published in May 26, and a couple of updates was made to those letters to meet developing country requests. They also were quite concerned about the way that means of implementations were addressed. But let's see, I think we can expect the workshop to start today smoothly, but with some strong statements from parties. I think, things to watch this week is whether countries can maintain a constructive momentum on the GGA and on the bar workshop, how disagreements on adaptation finance are going to be addressed, whether adaptation and loss and damage gain more prominence in the discussions on the GST, so it's not solely focused on energy, and whether countries can demonstrate truly that adaptation is a pillar of climate action. So I think for me, the real test for adaptation is no longer agreeing on the problem, but really whether we can agree on how to deliver the solutions and the finance needed so that resilience can reach communities at scale. Thank you, Lily.
Thanks, Anna. So there are a lot of kind of concentric circles within the UNFCCC process, including in the logo behind me. And I'm going to talk about finance as 3 concentric circles to watch in Bonn this week and then throughout the rest of the year to COP31. And those circles would be Article 9 kind of at the core, the 1.3 trillion and Baku to Belém roadmap, and then Article 21C. And with Article 9, Alden has already mentioned, we have the new climate finance work program that was agreed in Belém last November. The politics sitting at the core of this are essentially who is obligated to do what when it comes to climate finance. And this, of course, has intense relevance to the NCQG, the new collective quantified goal on climate finance, and the 300 billion goal that kind of sits at the heart of that. It's particularly sensitive this year because of the cuts to overseas development assistance we've seen across major developed countries and the relative lack of new commitments on climate finance. Many major economies have yet to set forward what they will be providing on climate finance going forward. Obviously, those are conversations that will be litigated in capitals, but they set the backdrop for many of the tensions we see here. Notable exceptions to that are the UK and Canada, who have come forward with their pledges. And we actually have a tracker on our website that gives more detail on who's coming forward with what when. The second circle is the 1.3 trillion and the Baku to Belém roadmap, not a negotiated item per se, but an essential element of the NCQG package agreed in Baku 2 years ago. The Brazilians and Azerbaijanis put forward their roadmap at COP30, kind of an excellent comprehensive package of all the action that needs to happen within and outside of the UNFCCC process to start mobilizing those necessary flows into developing countries. But the main question is, now that it's kind of been noted in the decision text at the end of COP30, how do we implement? And this is something that Brazil is trying to get at with a series of different reports and actions over the course of the year. And they'll be having a consultation session on Thursday at lunch here that we'll be keeping a close eye on to see kind of what the momentum is there, especially given that every party has its own kind of complaints around the roadmap that was delivered last year. And then the final circle here is Article 21C, which is kind of gets to the heart of how are we aligning our entire financial system to make the changes to achieve a low carbon and climate resilient economy globally. The first Veredas dialogue on implementation of that article will be happening here in Bonn. This may feel like deja vu. We've had the Sharm el-Sheikh dialogue on Article 21C happening over the last couple years. That was focused on the scope of the article. We're now shifting to talking about implementation of this article. And the question we'll be watching for in the session this afternoon and tomorrow is what it looks like for parties to shift from kind of sharing best practices to addressing more of the systemic barriers happening at the international level, preventing flows from aligning with the green transition that we all need to make and climate resilience. I want to end by just flagging a couple climate finance issues that are happening, not here in Bonn, but kind of as we speak. One is that the World Bank's Climate Change Action Plan is expiring at the end of June. And this means that the 45% climate lending target is on the line, which is a really important part of the NCQG delivery and the kind of confidence that developing countries need to see that their needs will be met over the next 10 years. So discussions are very live on that in Washington at the moment. And then in a couple weeks' time, many of us will be gathering in London for London Climate Action Week, where a lot of the kind of rubber hits the road implementation conversations will be happening, both on the 1.3 trillion and on Article 21C. Not framed as such, but highly relevant. So we'll be keeping an eye on that as well, and happy to answer any questions from folks. Back to you, Alden.
Thanks to all of you for that. I would just note in your comment on Article 21C that 3 years ago when we had the victory of standing up $800 million for the Loss and Damage Fund in Dubai, I made a comment that that's great, but we're spending $3 billion a day on subsidizing production and consumption of fossil fuels, which are causing loss and damage. So it's a question of priorities. We have time for a few questions. Let's open it up. And if you can just say your name and your outlet. We'll start here with the woman on the left. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alejandra and I work for Carbon Post. I have a question for Anna. In terms of adaptation fund finance and flows of finance to the adaptation fund, my understanding is that under the Kyoto Protocol, the clean development mechanism was a main source of finance, not the main source, but like a major source of finance for the adaptation fund. Are there any indications of when or how the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism could start feeding into this? And yeah, basically, will that be the main source of finance, or is there talk of other things as well?
Yes, I'm going to let Lily take it because it's quite technical, but my understanding is that transitioning to the Paris Agreement basically allows the fund to receive the finance through Article 6. I have actually asked this question to Adaptation Fund and to others about the timeline because it's quite dire, right? We know that the Adaptation Fund needs money now. And there's not really a response yet, but I don't know if Lily, if you have more.
No, I don't have anything to add to that.
It's, yeah.
But it is able to take money from other sources. That's not the
Yes.
sole source
Yes.
of funding, if that was the question, yeah.
Yeah, it's not the sole source. And actually, if you go into the website, there's, anyone can give money to Adaptation Fund. Yeah.
So developed countries, operators are standing by if you want to
Yeah.
make a pledge.
I think their target is 300 million, and they've been bringing in around 150 a year, unfortunately. Yeah.
Other questions? Take first here and then woman in the back.
I'm Vincent, a cleration missionary from Rome, working for justice, peace, and integrative creation. Here we speak about loss and damage, just transition, all related to keeping the global temperature at the degree of 2 or below 1.5. On the other hand, now we are accelerating deep sea mining, using the fossil fuel there. What is your network doing? Is your network doing anything to prevent deep sea mining or to ban it?
I don't think we have anyone up here that's an expert on deep sea mining, but we are, of course, working to accelerate the transition away from fossil fuels, which would include not exploiting deep sea mining for fossil fuels. But we can maybe refer you later to some experts in the larger NGO community that are working on the deep sea mining issue, if that would be helpful.
And I think we all agree that you need both things, right? So you need to address the impacts that are happening now and in the near future, and then you need to address the fossil fuel issue. Yeah, for sure, at the same time.
Woman in the back here.
Good morning, it's good to be here. I'm Ruth Spencer from the Caribbean island of Antigua and Barbuda, a small Caribbean state. And on the topic of financing, it's declining, there's so many constraints to it. But for me, working at the local community level, I see the strength in the cooperation across the conventions. I work with groups involved in all the MEAs that the government has ratified. And our groups, we work voluntary, but we achieve so much because for every dollar that comes, we can educate the people on chemicals and waste, how it impacts, climate and biodiversity. And what we are achieving is an informed society. So I would like to see more the climate space. I want to see more cooperation. I don't have all the knowledge, but I build partnerships coming to these meetings. So if I need help with an area, I can reach out, and it doesn't cost money. So I think we have to start being proactive and thinking how partnerships, collaboration can help us to meet the targets. because I'm not waiting and looking for money. You hear the big numbers, but it never comes down to where I work. So I have to find processes that work to help me to meet biodiversity targets, climate. So I want to see a greater push for collaboration across the conventions. Thank you.
I think we would just say amen to that, but you want to say more than that?
No, absolutely. And I think it's a really good reminder as well that when we're talking about implementation and means of implementation, finance is just one leg of a multi-leg stool. We have, finance, you also have capacity building and that kind of collaboration you're talking about, and also kind of technical assistance and knowledge transfer. And it's essential that we don't lose sight of that kind of holy trinity, if you will, and just talk about how much money is coming into the system rather than focusing on the results that are coming out of it.
But I think you were also getting at a broader question, which is we need a culture shift in this process. We need people to see that we're all together. We need to work together. We need to collaborate. As the subnational groups say, we need radical collaboration. We can't point fingers at each other and say, your end of the lifeboat is sinking, because we're all in the same boat. And so I think we need to infuse that spirit into these halls, and that's part of what we're calling on the presidencies to do with the shift from negotiations to implementation, to really roll up our sleeves and get things done for people, because that's what this process should be all about.
Yeah, exactly. And just to add to that, I mean, this is what the action agenda is, intended to bring together a lot of the initiatives which are working on the ground, bring together kind of subnationals, non-state actors, and also kind of order and kind of give direction within that structure, so that we're actually aiming and we're kind of being a coherent force that's greater than the sum of our parts. So there's more work to do to make sure that there is true inclusion in the process. But yeah, this is the first step, and we're in a process of transition, as I was saying, to hopefully kind of be able to make the most of all the forces which are happening at local level.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. We're at time. We will be around over the next 2 weeks if you want to approach us in the hallways, and we will be available outside if you have any additional questions. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, if you have questions in Spanish or any other languages, also do reach out.
Deutsch.
Yeah.